subscribe and tap the bell. Twice a day, we bring you the real words of the Stoics, not paraphrased, not softened. Epictetus wrote about freedom with the authority of someone who had actually lived on both sides of it. Born around the middle of the 1st century, he spent years enslaved in Rome, in the household of a wealthy freedman connected to the imperial court, before eventually gaining his freedom and going on to found and run his own school of philosophy. That biography sits underneath everything he later taught about what freedom actually is, and it explains why his definition of it refuses to line up neatly with legal status. He had experienced both a slave's formal condition and a free citizen's formal condition, and his teaching insists, repeatedly, that the more important distinction was never fully captured by either label. What little is known of his early life comes mostly secondhand, through students and later writers, but the broad outline is well established. He studied philosophy even while enslaved, under the Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus, and carried a physical impairment into his later life, generally reported as a lasting injury to his leg. None of that biography is presented in his own teaching as a grievance to be dwelt on. It appears, when it appears at all, as background evidence for an argument he makes on entirely independent grounds, that the condition of a person's body, property, and legal standing was never actually where their freedom or bondage was decided. His working definition starts from the same division that structures the rest of his philosophy: some things are within a person's power, and some things are not. Judgments, choices, desires, and aversions belong to a person completely, regardless of their legal or social standing. Body, property, reputation, and rank do not, no matter how firmly a person or a government might claim ownership over them. Freedom, on this account, isn't primarily a legal category granted or withheld by an owner or a state. It's the condition of being unhindered specifically in the one domain that was always actually yours, governing your own will, which means a person can, in principle, hold that freedom while enslaved, and a person can, just as easily, lack it while holding full legal citizenship and every external privilege that comes with it. Epictetus draws the line sharply enough that it becomes almost a working test rather than a slogan. He asks, of any given constraint, whether it actually reaches your judgment and your choices, or only reaches your body and your circumstances. A chain can bind an ankle. It was never, in his account, able to reach the part of a person that decides how to interpret the chain, and that remainder, small as it might sound stated plainly, is where he locates the entire question of freedom. Desire is where Epictetus locates most of the trouble. Wanting something that isn't within your own power to secure, he argues, puts you at the mercy of whatever or whoever actually controls it, which makes desire itself, misdirected toward externals, a kind of self-imposed bondage that has nothing to do with any legal document. A person desperate for a superior's approval is, functionally, that superior's subject regardless of their paperwork. A person desperate for wealth is subject to whatever circumstance current. Epictetus devoted an entire extended discourse to this subject directly, arguing that a person is free only to the degree they live according to their own will, unhindered, uncompelled, and unrestrained in the part of life that's actually theirs to govern. He applies the argument to people who would have been considered thoroughly free by any external legal measure, wealthy Romans, court officials, even the politically powerful, and finds many of them ruled by fear of losing status, or by appetite for more of it, in ways that leave them less free in the sense that actually mattered to him than a poor or even enslaved person whose desires were correctly ordered. Formal liberty, in his account, guarantees nothing about the internal condition it's so often assumed to produce automatically. He is direct about who this argument is aimed at, and it isn't primarily the powerless, it's the comfortable, the highly placed, the people least likely to question whether their standing has actually delivered the freedom it seems to promise. A person surrounded by servants and honors, anxiously managing every threat to that arrangement, is described by Epictetus in language ordinarily reserved for prisoners, watchful, restricted, and unable to act except within the narrow terms their own fear has drawn around them. The other half of the equation is aversion, what a person fears losing. Epictetus argues that fearing the loss of your body, your comfort, or even your life puts those same things in charge of you just as thoroughly as desire does, since a person governed by fear of a given loss will do almost anything to avoid it, handing enormous control to whoever or whatever can threaten that loss credibly. He lived this argument out later in life as well. When the Emperor Domitian banished philosophers from Rome, Epictetus left for Nicopolis in Greece and simply continued teaching there, apparently undiminished by the loss of the city, the audience, or the standing he'd built in the capital, because none of those things had ever been the actual location of his freedom to begin with. That response was genuinely unusual among his contemporaries. Banishment was designed, by the emperors who used it, to be a genuine punishment, stripping a person of standing, audience, and access all at once, and it worked as intended against a great many of the people it targeted. Epictetus's school in Nicopolis went on to attract students from across the Roman world regardless, including, by later report, admirers with considerable political standing of their own, which suggests his teaching on aversion wasn't simply a comforting theory he offered others but something that held up against the specific test his own life had handed him. This redefinition has a sharp edge that Epictetus doesn't blunt for comfort. It means a great many formerly free people, by his account, are not free in any sense he considered meaningful, while a smaller number of people without formal freedom might genuinely possess it. He isn't dismissing the real, severe difference between legal slavery and legal freedom. He lived both and never pretends they're equivalent conditions to endure. He's insisting that legal status was never the entire story, and that a second, independent freedom exists underneath it, available or unavailable regardless of which side of the legal line a person happens to occupy. What makes this more than an abstract argument is that Epictetus built an entire working philosophy on the claim and then lived inside it for decades, teaching students who included both the powerful and the ordinary, treating the same freedom as available to each of them under the same terms. Freedom, in his account, was never a possession handed down by an emperor, an owner, or a law, something that could be granted on one date and revoked on another by someone else's decision. It was a discipline of desire and judgment, practiced daily, that a person either maintained or surrendered, largely independent of whatever their legal papers happened to say about them. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We bring you Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and the Stoics they trained, straight from the source, twice a day.